Tears filled his eyes, but the scream died in his throat. The boot steps were in the bedroom, separated from them by nothing more than a simple closet door. "Janus!" A man's gruff voice called out. "Uncle Ivan," Janus said, relief washing over him. He pushed the closet door open at the same time as his uncle pulled the handle. "Come on, boy. We don't have time for games." Uncle Ivan was wearing a full helmeted void suit, although the vacuum-proof outfit was of an advanced make Janus had only ever seen during the annual trials. "Mom told me to stay here with Callie," Janus said, climbing out. "Your mother is dead, Janus," Uncle Ivan said, and the words hit Janus in the chest, like Ivan had kicked him. "Now, come on." Ivan grabbed Janus, still carrying Callie by the shoulder, and propelled him toward the front door. Outside the apartment was all the chaos Janus had feared. The air smelled like vomit and electrical shortages. He saw scorch marks on the walls, bodies, and bloodstains. His feet slipped in a patch of dripping oil, and he would have fallen had Ivan not caught him back the back of the coveralls and hauled him to his feet. Passages had been barricaded. More doors had been broken into, and streaks of red were going into or out of them. Janus couldn't tell. He was having trouble processing it all. His uncle shoved him when he slowed down, and Callie was trying to break free of his arms, and his mother was dead. "Where's Dad?" he managed to choke out. "What happened to your hand?" Ivan asked, instead of answering. "What?" Yeah." Janus looked at his right hand and saw he was bleeding badly. "Callie bit me," Ivan grunted. "Get some disinfectant on that as soon as possible." "Where are we going?" Janus asked. Ivan overrode the lockdown on a door, and Janus flinched back as the heavy metal barrier slid up to reveal one of the freight bays. Ivan shoved him inside. The freight bay was full of containers, devoid of people. Ivan marched over to a rust-red container, punched a code into the keypad, and the door unsealed. "Yeah, here. Up. I want to know what's going on," Janus said. Ivan cuffed him on the side of the head and shouted, "Get in the damned box!" Janus was shocked. Uncle Ivan had never so much as raised his voice at Janus and Callie before. "Get in the box, boy. You stay in there, and you stay quiet. Get suited up, and get your sister suited up as well. Do yours first. The box has its own oxygen supply, but you can't rely on that. Not today." Ivan reached for his shoulder, but Janus shrunk back, and he thought he might have seen a flash of regret on his uncle's face before it was replaced with grim resolve. Janus backed into the container, not taking his eyes off Ivan. Ivan closed the door, and the container hissed as it sealed shut and pressurized. The sounds and smells from outside, the squealing alarm, and the smells of vomit, of fall and smoke, faded to only a trace. Janus and Callie were alone again. Callie squirmed and Janus set her down. His 2-year-old sister seemed surprised by this development and looked up at him curiously, then got distracted by the new space and tottered off, arms wide, her delight at her newfound freedom on display. Janus shivered and hugged his arms. He wanted to cry. According to his uncle, his mother was dead, and Janus didn't even know if that was true. He'd asked about his father and gotten nothing. Dead people were lying in the hallways, and no one was helping. His uncle had hit him for asking a question. It felt like the whole world was ending, but worse, it felt like he couldn't do anything about it because he didn't know anything. What if Uncle Invarian was lying? There was a muffled screech from outside the container, and a new, quieter, but no less urgent alarm went off inside the container. A small display screen on the wall flashed red. Container locked. Equalize pressure before opening doors. Janus dismissed the alarm and saw that the freight bay had somehow become unpressurized. The void, that ever-present and all-consuming reality of his homeworld, was just outside the door. Like all children, Janus had been trained to suit up in the event of a breach, but that had been in a controlled environment. 6 seconds, he said under his breath. That was how long someone would stay conscious if exposed to a vacuum without a suit. The container creaked as the vacuum both cooled and pulled at its walls, and Janus stood, frozen in place, as if he was back in his bedroom closet, and the void would come for him if he made a sound. Callie squealed in delight, and Janus turned to see her press her face against a glass-fronted locker. Protect your sister, no matter what happens. Those were the last words his mother said to him. Janus swallowed and moved quickly to the suit locker. He'd regained enough awareness to realize they were in some sort of cattle car, a way to transport livestock across the airless dust of Irkalla. Water nozzles hung from the ceiling, empty feed trays were mounted on the wall, and tie-down points had been bolted to the floor. Someone had stashed a sizable first aid kit next to the locker, and Janus saw oxygen and water storage in the rear right corner. We can survive this, he told himself. He opened the suit locker and slid the suits out on a rack. 4 suits were hanging from the rail. One was clearly made for a toddler, and another was his size. The remaining 2 were adult-sized, one man's, one woman's, and Janus realized these were for his parents. Maybe his mom and dad were still alive, and Uncle Ivan had gone to get them. Maybe he just wanted to scare Janus to get him to hurry. Janus held on to that hope. His hand was still bleeding and hurt, although not as much as before, so Janus grabbed some biofoam from the first aid kit and sprayed it down, disinfecting and temporarily sealing it. Then he pulled the smallest of the suits down and worked on getting Callie into it. His little sister did not cooperate. She yowled and fought, and she tried to bite him again. It was what Janus's father called the Invarian temper, although Janus's mother and her brother, Uncle Ivan, insisted there was no such thing. Janus knew he had a bit of his mother's fire too, and he used it now to wrangle his sister into the suit and thank the void Callie was still wearing training diapers, so he didn't have to figure out how to hook up that part of the equipment. He closed and tightened all the connectors, connected her to the canister's air supply, and locked her helmet. The 2-year-old glowered at him through her helmet visor. It's only until Uncle Ivan comes back, Janus told her, although she couldn't hear him inside the sealed suit. He hurried to take his coveralls off and get into the suit that was his size. He almost made it. He had 2 legs and an arm in, when a burst of sharp clacks and showers of sparks filled the container. He reached for his throat in panic as the void snatched the breath from his lungs, overbalanced, and tripped over his boots. Janus slammed into the container floor. He felt the vibration and the sharp pain in his shoulder, but there was no sound. His head flopped to the side. He stared at his sister, at the flashing display, at the line of ping-pong ball-sized holes that had been punched into the container door. His throat ached, and his vision was blurry. His eyes rested on the shape of his sister's suit, but she couldn't help him. I should have taken care of myself first, he realized in that last moment of consciousness. It was the death that waited for every Irkallan from birth. It lurked a single mistake away to punish the thoughtless and the ignorant. He was blind, deaf, and dying when gauntleted hands lifted him and pressed an emergency mask to his face. Chapter 0. Tragedies can be more extensive than the stunting of life. Few injustices deeper than the denial of an opportunity to strive, or even to hope, by a limit imposed from without, but falsely identified as lying within. Stephen Jay Gould, The Mismeasure of Man the Void, outside of Prime Dome planet Irkalla. Survivor's Refuge 4452.2. 10 interstellar Prime Dome's early shift started in the dark. Janus Invarian crowded into the airlock with 20 other mechanics, engineers, surveyors, and agronomists. They wore hard suits, soft suits, and custom activity suits. They carried heavy tools and ruggedized scanners. What little conversation existed among the tired and sometimes hungover workers died as helmets were sealed and the last of the air was sucked from the room. The outer door rotated open and they stumbled out into the dust. Prime Dome's inner light cast long shadows ahead of them. Other than that, the only brightness in the frigid vacuum was faint starlight and the stabbing beams of suit lamps. There was a particular gait to the more experienced workers like Janus. They moved deliberately, lifting their back foot, heel first, toe pointed, before setting it down flat-footed in a long step that made them look like they were lumbering giants. The casual vac workers, the people who only went out once a month, or were simply walking from the main dome to one of the smaller facilities, let their boots drag through the fine particulates, suit lamps jittering and sweeping across the gray landscape, drawing curses from the people who walk through the dust every day, one suit rupture away from death. One. Janus knew better than most how deadly the void could be. So his movements were slow and fluid, his visual scan methodical, his attention unwavering. He didn't curse his ancestors or the survivor, like his uncle sometimes did. Although it was hard to understand them sometimes. Irkalla was the manifestation of an uncaring universe, uncompromising in its power, unwavering in its revolutions. It was all Janus's family could do to survive it. But their ancestors had fled a devastating war that ravaged thousands of worlds in a small fleet of civilian and military ships. And they could have gone anywhere but home. So why, in the void's name, did they settle here? He reached the site of the first maintenance task on his list and got to work. 4 hours later, the air in his suit was dense with the smell of exertion. It had been a rough half shift. The broken gas reclamator he was working on just wanted to stay broken. And he was running late on his impossibly tight schedule. He barely registered the first rays of sunlight as they made the quartz crystal in the ultrafine dust sparkle. The thermometer on his suit steadily ticked upward, and with the first tendrils of sun just peeking over the horizon, void or not, it was going to get hot fast. That didn't mean he was going to rush the job, clearing out the gas reclamation pumps at the waste. Processing pit was literally a shit job, but it required someone careful and precise. And he valued the trust Prime Dome put in him. He wasn't about to betray that trust by not fixing everything to the best of his abilities, even if it took a little longer. 15 minutes later, his visor fogged up, and his wrist sore. He finally managed to run the purge cycle, clearing the crap and other solids from the line. He packed his tools up and strapped them to his suit, then climbed out of the processing pit, and immediately saw the growing queue stretching outside of the airlock, which was odd. This late, only the slow and the overly diligent should have still been out, unless something was wrong. As he made his way toward the swarm of hard suits, eager to get out of the void and back into the comfort and relative safety of atmosphere and climate control at the end of early shift, he could see the growing impatience of the workers from their subtle, anxious movements. Janus clenched his jaw. Someone didn't do their job. The speaker in his helmet crackled to life. Ryler, Abroxis, his best friend, was pinging him on a private channel. Janus, you out here? Some survivor cursed jackass is about to override the safety protocols. Wanted to check before explosive decompression took us all out. On my way, Janus responded as he hustled to make his way to the front, weathering the glares through the faceplates of the gathered masses. It was always risky to draw attention as an outsider, but he didn't have enough friends to let Ryler die over someone else's carelessness. Why the materials specialist was out here for early shift was anyone's guess. But Ryler was a man of varied interests and great enthusiasm. As Janus squeezed through the small opening in the outer airlock doors, a big guy, or at least a bigger hard suit, took offense as Janus brushed past him. Hey, where you think you're going, buddy? Janus heard over the public channel. Janus turned and faced the bigger man down. You can let me in there to fix it, or you can bake outside. What's it going to be? Dude, let him through, Ryler said, poking his head around the jammed lock. You really want to argue with a Prometheus-based survivor about a broken airlock? Janus winced at the mention of his long-dead home dome, but he was grateful when the big worker backed down, letting him get inside. The last thing he needed right now was to have to deal with the human element along with the mechanical. What's the problem? Janus asked over the public channel. The hard suit in front of the access panel turned and looked at him. The man shrugged, his whole suit raising and lowering with his shoulders. Same thing it always is. The hydraulic system locked up. There's no leak. I'm gonna override it. You know there's a stacking 0.5% chance of disaster every time someone runs that software bypass. Ryler responded. It's designed for emergencies, not convenience. Hey, if it'll get us inside, that's all that matters, the guy at the panel said. Just give me a minute with it, Janus said, bumping the man's shoulder gently with his fist. The man made a face behind his visor, but he made room. Janus looked the thing over. If an air bubble had worked its way into the tubing, letting the gears run dry, it could indeed cause a problem. It was unlikely, but it was also life or death, and making sure was the difference between them getting home late and half a dozen breached suits. He didn't see any fluid or residue, and the line felt charged, but he opened another panel just adjacent to the controls anyway, pulled out the hand pump, and flushed the system manually. Even if the leak was somewhere he couldn't see, the system would self-seal and draw on the reserve supply until sector maintenance came to service it. Seriously? The guy Janus had moved out of the way groused. Just override it. Wow. Better to be short and late than on time and dead, Ryler responded in Janus's place. Time is money, asshole. Do you know who I am? The man asked, but Janus just kept pumping. When he was done, he checked the readout again, and this time the sensors showed green. Janus initiated. The open sequence and the outer airlock doors closed behind them. Air flooded the chamber, and the inner lock opened slowly, revealing a beautiful thing inside. Home. Or at least, what he'd come to accept as home. Finally, the impatient worker grumbled. As he pushed past Janus with an unnecessary nudge, several others followed on his trail, so quickly that Janus was stuck watching the throng make its way inside before going in himself. Most didn't give him as much as a glance, but a small minority touched their hand to their chins in thanks as they passed. When he finally made his way into the airlock, he saw Ryler had also waited